Neighbors mocked her underground bedroom. Jonas Bell, who had survived 12 Nebraska winters and buried his wife and infant son, told her, "Dig your children into that hill and you will smother them before February." She had $31, two children, and no way to cut the 6 cords winter demanded. On January 12, 1888, the temperature dropped 70 degrees in 8 hours. But 4 months earlier, Ragna Breka had never trusted Earth to keep a child alive. She had arrived in Harlan County in late August of 1887 with a trunk, 2 children, and a letter from a dead man's creditor. The letter said her husband owed $43 for seed and flour advanced that spring. It said the debt transferred to her upon his death. It said payment was expected before the first snow. Ragna Breka had not expected to be a widow at 32. She had not expected to bury her husband in a county where she knew no one. She had not expected to stand in the doorway of a half-finished shack with a 9-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son and realize that the man who had promised to build them a life had left them nothing but walls that did not meet the roof and a cook stove with a cracked hinge. The claim lay a few miles south of the Republican River on rolling ground where grass bent in every direction under wind that never stopped. There was sky. There was distance. There was no timber worth the name for 20 miles. The nearest trees thick enough to cut for fuel stood in creek bottoms, already picked clean by settlers who had arrived years earlier and stripped every branch they could reach. She had $31 in mixed bills and coin. She had one milk cow that produced less each week as the grass dried. She had no horse, no mule, no ox. She had 2 children who did not yet understand that the man who had carried them on his shoulders was not coming back from the grave behind the unfinished shed. The shack measured roughly 16 by 18 feet, with plank walls chinked badly and gaps under the sill wide enough to see daylight through. The roof was on, but barely. The floor was packed earth. The single window faced east, which meant the morning sun would wake them, but the afternoon wind would find every seam. Her husband had planned to finish the walls before winter. He had planned to dig a proper root cellar. He had planned to cut wood from a stand he had found 2 days' travel north, where a farmer was selling deadfall cheap. He had planned many things. Then he had torn his shoulder helping a neighbor thresh wheat, and the wound had soured, and the fever had come, and 3 weeks later Ragna had stood in a cemetery she had never seen before and watched men she did not know shovel dirt onto a pine box. Now it was September, and the nights were already cold enough to see her breath, and the wind was already strong enough to make the shack creak, and she had no one to tell her whether what she was doing was brave or stupid. The first neighbor to visit was a woman named Marta Quam, who lived on the next section over with her husband and 4 children. Marta was large and practical and had no patience for sentiment. She walked through the shack without being invited, touched the walls, kicked at the gaps under the sill, and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You cannot winter here." Ragna said, "I have no choice." "Everyone has choices," Marta said. "Yours are bad, but they exist. You could sell the cow and buy passage back to wherever you came from. You could find a family willing to take you in as help. You could marry before the snow." "I will not marry a man I do not know to save myself from weather." "Then you will freeze," Marta said, "or your children will. These walls are paper. This stove is cracked. You have no wood stacked. You have no team to haul wood. You have no money to buy coal. I have seen women like you before. They come out here with men who have plans, and the men die, and the women discover that plans do not keep children warm." Ragna did not answer. Marta looked at her for a long moment, then shook her head and left. That night, frost formed on the inside of the window before midnight. Ragna woke twice to feed the stove with cobs and twisted hay, and each time the fire ate what she gave it and asked for more. By morning, her hands ached from the cold, and her younger child, a boy named Peter, had crawled into her bed sometime in the darkness and wrapped himself around her like he was trying to disappear inside her warmth. The man who came 3 days later was not a neighbor. He was a freighter named Gunderson, who hauled goods between the railroad depot and the scattered claims south of the river. He had known her husband. He had been the one to carry the seed and flour that spring. Now he stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground, and he told her what she already suspected. "The lumber is delayed again," he said. "The mill in Grand Island had a fire. There's nothing coming for 6 weeks, maybe longer." "And coal?" "Coal is coming, but the price has climbed. $12 a ton now. 14 by November if the weather turns early." Ragna calculated. $14 would leave her 17. She would need that for flour, salt, and medicines. She would need that for the spring seed if she wanted to plant. She would need that for the debt collectors if she wanted to keep the land. How much would 1 ton carry me through? Through January if you burn careful. Through March if you freeze half the time. Through April if you're lucky and the winter is mild. And if the winter is not mild? Gunderson did not answer. He did not need to. After he left, Ragna sat on the edge of her bed and did the mathematics again. She had no horse to drag wood from the distant stands. She had no saw large enough to fell trees alone. She had no wagon to haul what she could not drag. She had a shovel, a hatchet, a bucksaw meant for trimming, and 2 children who were old enough to carry buckets, but not old enough to work a crosscut. The wind picked up outside. She could hear it finding the gaps in the walls, whistling through the places where her husband's hands had never finished their work. Her daughter, Sigrid, appeared in the doorway. She was 9 years old and had her father's eyes and her mother's silence. She had not cried at the funeral. She had not cried since. "Mother," she said, "there is a man coming." Jonas Bell was 58 years old and had homesteaded 12 Nebraska winters. He had buried a wife and an infant after the winter of 1873, when the cold had come early and stayed late and taken everything he could not carry inside. He had built 3 sod houses with his own hands. He had seen the grasshopper year and the hard winter and the drought that had driven half the county back east. He walked with a limp from frostbite that had taken 2 toes from his left foot, and he spoke with the authority of a man who had paid for every word of advice in blood and grief. He had come, he said, because he had known her husband, because they had worked together during the threshing, because a man who dies helping his neighbors deserves to have his neighbors look after his family. Jonas Bell walked the property the way Marta had, but slower. He examined the walls. He examined the roof. He examined the cook stove and the woodshed and the gap between the shack and the unfinished lean-to. He examined the pile of cobs and the twisted hay and the 3 cords of green cottonwood that Ragna's husband had managed to drag home before he died. 3 cords. It was not nothing, but it was not enough. "How much do I need?" Ragna asked. Jonas Bell did not look at her. He was still examining the walls, pressing his palm against the planks, feeling for gaps. "To survive? Or to be comfortable?" "To keep my children alive." 6 cords, he said. "Minimum. Good hardwood seasoned, stacked proper. This cottonwood will burn fast and wet. You will be feeding that stove every 2 hours through the hard nights. 8 cords would be safer. 10 would be comfortable. I have 3. You have 3 cords of green wood that will smoke and spit and give you half the heat of proper fuel, and you have no way to get more." He turned and looked at her then. His eyes were pale blue and very tired. He had seen this before. He would see it again. Women alone, children alone, families caught between what they had and what they needed. The frontier was full of graves belonging to people who had almost made it. "You cannot stay here," he said. "I have nowhere else to go." "Then find somewhere. Sell what you can. Take your children to town. Find work. Find a roof that does not leak. This shack," he shook his head, "this shack is not a home. It is a coffin with windows. My husband built this. Your husband is dead. And if you stay here, you will be too. Must be 4 February. Ragna felt something in her chest that might have been anger or might have been fear. She could not tell the difference anymore. "What would you have me do? Abandon the claim? Walk away from everything he died for?" Jonas Bell was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the doorway and looked out at the rolling hills behind the shack. There was a slope there, facing south, where the grass was shorter and the soil had a reddish tint. It was not a large slope, maybe 40 feet from base to crest, but it was solid ground and it blocked the north wind, and the sun hit it full in the winter afternoons. "Your husband," Jonas said slowly, "was he a digger? Did he work underground?" "His father dug wells in Norway. He learned as a boy." "Did he teach you anything?" Ragna did not understand the question. "Teach me what?" Jonas Bell turned back to face her. His expression had changed. There was something new in it, something that might have been curiosity, or might have been concern, or might have been the particular calculation of a man who has seen many things go wrong. "That slope," he said. "South-facing, solid clay. A man who knew what he was doing could cut a room into that hill, a dugout, not a house, but a room. It would be warmer than this shack. The earth holds heat. The wind cannot reach you underground." Ragna looked at the slope. She had not thought of it as anything but a hill. "I do not know how to build a dugout." "No," Jonas Bell said, "you do not, and that is the problem." He walked past her, toward the slope. She followed. The children watched from the doorway. "A dugout done right is warm," he said. "I have seen families survive hard winters in nothing but a hole in the ground with a sod roof. But a dugout done wrong," he shook his head. "A dugout done wrong is a grave. Water seeps in. The roof collapses. The air goes bad. I've seen children smother in dugouts that were not vented proper. I've seen families drown in dugouts that were not drained proper." He stopped at the base of the slope and looked up at it. Then he looked at Ragna. "If you dig into that hill without knowing what you are doing, you will kill your children. Do you understand? You will bury them alive." "Then teach me." Jonas Bell laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "I am not a digger," he said. "I am a farmer. I know enough to know what I do not know. And what I know is this. You do not have the skill to do this alone. You do not have the time to learn. You do not have the money to hire someone who knows. And I will not stand by and watch you put your children underground like you are planning them for the winter." He walked back toward her, and his voice dropped, and he said the words that would echo in her ears for months. "Dig your children into that hill, and you will smother them before February kills the rest of us." Then he left. That night, Ragna lay awake in the cold shack and listened to the wind. Her children slept beside her, pressed close for warmth. The stove was down to embers. She should get up and feed it. She should burn more of the precious cobs and hay. She should keep the cold at bay for another few hours. Instead, she thought about the slope. She thought about her father in Norway. Oke, who had stored potatoes in earth-covered banks that never froze even when the snow was deep. She thought about the way the soil in those banks had felt when she was a child, cool in summer, warm in winter, always the same steady temperature while the world outside swung from extreme to extreme. She thought about the wash cut behind the claim, where she had knelt last week to scrub clothes. The wind had been terrible that day. cold enough to sting her face. But in the wash, where the ground dropped away and the banks rose on either side, there had been stillness. The air had been calm, and the soil had been warm. Not warm like a fire, but warm like something that had been holding on to yesterday's sun and had not yet given it up. She thought about Jonas Bell's words. Dig your children into that hill, and you will smother them. She thought about his other words. This shack is a coffin with windows. Either way, she was burying them. The only question was which grave would hold. The idea came to her not as a solution, but as a question. If the earth was warmer than the air, why not use the earth as a wall? If the wind was the enemy, why not put the wind above her instead of around her? If the stove could not heat a leaky shack, why not ask it to heat a smaller space, a space where the walls were not wood that leaked but soil that held? She was not thinking of a dugout. She was thinking of a room, a bedroom, a space just large enough for sleeping, where the children could spend the cold nights while she tended the stove above ground. A space that would stay warm through its own nature, so she did not have to burn fuel, she did not have to keep it warm. She was thinking of the slope behind the shack, south-facing. That meant the winter sun would hit it. Solid clay. That meant it would hold its shape. Far enough from the wash that water would drain away, not toward it. She was thinking of cutting into that slope, not deep, not far, just far enough to make a room, 8 feet wide, 10 feet deep, high enough to stand in at the front, lower at the back where the soil pressed down, a timber frame at the entrance, a door, a small window, a vent shaft rising up through the soil to let bad air escape. She was thinking of stones. Her father had heated stones in the fire and placed them under blankets to warm beds on cold nights. The stones held heat for hours. If she dug a trench under a sleeping platform and filled it with fire-heated stones each evening, the platform would stay warm through the night without any fire burning in the room itself. No fire in the room meant no smoke to choke them, no fuel to run out at midnight. Just the slow, steady release of stored warmth from stones that had been heated in the cook stove above. It was not a complete plan. It was barely a plan at all, but it was something. She got up. She fed the stove. She watched the flames catch, and she thought about mathematics. 1 room above ground with leaky walls and gaps under the sill. 30 below zero outside meant 20 degrees inside at best, and that was with the stove burning constantly. 1 room below ground with 3 sides of earth and a heavy door. The earth itself was warmer than the winter air, much warmer. She did not know the exact numbers, but she remembered how the root cellars in Norway had felt in winter. Cool, yes, but not cold. 50 degrees maybe. 55, even without any fire at all. If she started at 55 and added hot stones, she might reach 60. 65. Warm enough to sleep without shivering. Warm enough to keep children alive. Jonas Bell had said it would take 6 cords of wood to keep this shack livable. She had 3 cords of green cottonwood. That was half what she needed for the leaky room above ground. But if the underground room was already warm, she would not need to heat it the same way. She would only need to lift the temperature from 55 to 65. 10 degrees, not 40 degrees, not 50 degrees. 10. The same fuel could go further, much further. She would still have the shack above ground for cooking, for daytime work, for everything that required light and space. But at night, when the cold was worst and the fuel burned fastest, she and the children could retreat underground. They could sleep in warmth that came from the earth itself. It was insane. Jonas Bell had said so. Marta Quam would say so. Everyone who heard would say so. But the mathematics said something else. She began the next morning. She did not tell anyone what she was doing. She did not ask permission. She took the shovel her husband had left and walked to the slope behind the shack and began to dig. The first cut was shallow, just a test, just a way to see how the soil behaved. The clay was harder than she expected. It fought the shovel. It made her shoulders ache and her palms sting. But it held its shape. Each cut stayed clean. Each chunk of soil lifted free without crumbling. She worked for 2 hours before her daughter found her. "Mother," Sigrid said, "what are you doing?" "Digging." "Digging what?" Ragna paused. She was sweating despite the cold. Her hands were already blistered. "A room," she said, "for sleeping." Sigrid was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Bell said we should not dig here." "Mr. Bell said many things. He said you would smother us." Ragna drove the shovel into the clay and looked at her daughter. Sigrid had her father's eyes, dark and serious, always watching, always calculating. "Do you trust me?" Ragna asked. Sigrid did not answer. "I am going to dig this room," Ragna said. "I am going to frame it and seal it and vent it. I'm going to make it warm. And when winter comes, you and Peter are going to sleep here. And you're not going to freeze. That is what I am going to do. Do you believe me?" Sigrid looked at the cut in the hillside. She looked at her mother's blistered hands. She looked at the shovel, at the pile of red clay, at the slope rising above them. "I believe you will try," she said. It was not the answer Ragna wanted, but it was enough. Marta Quam came 3 days later. She found Ragna waist deep in a cut that was now 4 feet wide and 6 feet into the slope. The clay walls rose on 3 sides. The floor was rough but level. The pile of excavated soil had grown large enough that the children were using it to make tunnels and forts. "What in the name of God," Marta said, "are you doing?" Ragna did not stop digging. Building a bedroom. Underground? In the slope. Marta was quiet for a long moment. Then she climbed down into the cut and examined the walls. She pressed her palm against the clay the way Jonas Bell had pressed his palm against the planks of the shack. "It is warm," she said. There was surprise in her voice. "The earth holds heat." "The earth also holds water. What happens when it rains?" "I am digging a drainage trench above the room. The water will run around it, not through it." "What happens when the roof falls in?" "I am not building a sod roof. I'm framing the front with timber and leaving the earth as it is. The slope is solid clay. It has held this shape for 1,000 years. It will hold for another winter." Marta shook her head. "You are mad." "Perhaps." "You're going to bury your children in a hole like a gopher." "Perhaps." "You are going to—" Marta stopped. She looked at the walls again. She looked at the floor. She looked at the cut where Ragna was still digging, still widening, still going deeper. "How will you heat it?" she asked. "Stones. I will heat them in the cook stove and bring them down. They will release warmth all night." "And air? How will your children breathe?" "A vent shaft. I will run a pipe up through the soil and out the top of the slope. Bad air rises, good air enters through the door." Marta was quiet again. Then she said, "If the earth is so kind, why do people climb out of it to live?" Ragna finally stopped digging. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her arms ached. Her back was screaming. She had been working since dawn, and it was nearly noon. "Because they have fuel," she said. "Because they have lumber. Because they have help. I have none of those things. All I have is a shovel and a slope. So I am using what I have." Marta looked at her for a long time. Then she climbed out of the cut and stood on the lip, looking down. "Your children will hate it," she said. "They will not want to sleep underground." They will hate freezing more. They will be afraid. I will be with them. They will. Marta stopped. She shook her head again. You are mad, she said. But you are stubborn. I suppose those are the same thing out here. She left without saying goodbye, but she did not try to stop Ragna from digging. The hostile skeptic arrived on a Wednesday. Ephraim Cutter owned the nearest lumberyard and freight partnership in town. He was a large man with small eyes and a voice that carried. Well, he had been pressing settlers to buy lumber and coal on credit at winter rates, rates that would leave them in debt until harvest. His business depended on people being desperate. His business depended on people having no alternatives. Ragna's hole in the hill was an alternative. He arrived with 2 men in a wagon loaded with boards destined for a claim farther down the road. He stopped at Ragna's property, and he climbed down from the wagon, and he walked to the slope where she was working. She was 8 feet into the hill now. The chamber was taking shape. The walls were squared and smooth. The floor was level. The front opening was framed with cottonwood posts she had salvaged from her husband's unfinished lean-to. Cutter looked at it all. Then he looked at her. I heard you were digging a grave back here, he said. I thought it was a joke. It is not a grave. It looks like one. It is a bedroom. Cutter laughed. It was a big laugh, meant to be heard, meant to make her feel small. A bedroom, he said, underground, like an animal, like a root cellar, like a dugout, like half the people in this county lived when they first arrived. Dugouts are for people who have nothing. Are you saying you have nothing? I'm saying I have what I have. Cutter walked closer. He looked at the chamber walls. He looked at the cottonwood posts. He looked at the pile of clay. I could sell you lumber, he said. Enough to finish that shack proper, enough to seal the walls and stop the wind. I could sell you coal, enough to keep your children warm without, he gestured at the hole, without this madness. At what rate? 22% interest, payable at harvest. I cannot afford 22%. You cannot afford to freeze either. Ragna did not answer. She kept working. The shovel bit into clay. The clay gave way. Another bucket load of earth joined the pile. Cutter watched her for a moment. Then his voice changed. I've heard about you, he said. The widow Brecka, the one whose husband died from a scratch, the one who thinks she can survive alone, the one who is so proud she would rather bury her children in a hole than accept help from Christian neighbors. Your terms are not help. They are chains. My terms are business. This, he pointed at the chamber, this is not business. This is stupidity. This is a woman too proud to admit she is beaten. I am not beaten. You will be. He stepped closer. Yeah, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. No Christian mother beds her children underground unless she has lost her senses. You dig this hole, you put those children in it, and by spring either you will come crawling to me for lumber and coal, or the county will be digging a real grave for what is left of your family. Ragna stopped digging. She turned to face him. Her hands were bleeding. Her dress was caked with clay. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in damp strings around her face. I will not crawl to you, she said. Not now, not ever. And if you want to stand there and tell me that my children are going to die, you can say it to my face, or you can leave, but you cannot do both. Cutter's small eyes narrowed. He was not used to being challenged. He was certainly not used to being challenged by a widow with a shovel. The county will remember this, he said. They will remember who watched and did nothing while a mad woman buried her children alive. Then let them remember. He turned and walked back to his wagon. The 2 men who had been waiting watched him go, then watched Ragna, then climbed up beside him. The wagon rolled away down the track, leaving ruts in the soft earth. Ragna watched it go. Then she turned back to the hole in the hill. The chamber was not finished. The frame was not complete. The vent was not installed. The drainage trench was not dug. She had weeks of work ahead of her, and no guarantee any of it would matter. But she was still here. She was still digging, and Cutter could remember whatever he wanted. The days blurred together. One, she woke before dawn. She fed the stove. She fed the children. She fed the cow. Then she took her shovel and walked to the slope and began to dig. The chamber grew, 6 feet deep, 8 feet deep, 9 feet deep. The walls climbed around her until she stood in a space that felt almost like a room. She squared the corners. She smoothed the floor. She cut a shallow trench along the back wall where any seeping water could collect and drain toward the entrance. The children helped when they could. Sigrid carried buckets of clay to the pile. Peter carried smaller buckets. They worked in silence mostly, the way children do when they are not sure what they are working toward, but trust that their mother knows. At night, Ragna lay in the cold shack and planned. She would need timber for the front frame. She had some cottonwood posts from the lean-to, a few boards her husband had bought before he died, but not enough. She would need more. She would need a vent pipe. She had seen an abandoned cook shed 3 miles east, its stovepipe still attached. If the owner had left, she might be able to salvage it. If the owner had not left, she might be able to trade. She would need stones for the heat trench. River stones were best, smooth and dense, able to hold warmth for hours. The Republican River was 3 miles north. She could gather them. She could carry them back in buckets. It would take days, weeks. She would need clay to seal the seams. She had plenty of clay. That, at least, was not a problem. She would need quilts for the inner door. She had quilts, not many, but enough. She would need a window. Glass was expensive. She did not have glass, but she had seen windows made of oiled paper in the old country. They let light through. They kept wind out. It was not elegant, but it was possible. Each night she added to the list. Each morning she returned to the hole. The first setback came on a Thursday. She had reached 9 feet deep, almost to the back wall of the chamber, when her shovel hit something that was not clay. It was a root, thick and old, snaking through the soil at chest height. She tried to cut through it with the hatchet. The hatchet bounced back. She tried to dig around it. The clay crumbled. She tried to pull it free. It would not move. She stood in the chamber and looked at the root and felt something that might have been despair. Then she heard footsteps above her. A man was standing at the lip of the cut, looking down. He was old, 60 at least, maybe older, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood as the cottonwood posts. He wore a patched coat and carried a worn leather bag, and he was studying the walls of her chamber with an expression she could not read. "You have a root," he said. "Yes." "It is from the cottonwood on the other side of the slope. The roots run deep. They follow water." Ragna wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I cannot cut through it." "No," the man said, "but you can go around it. Cut above and below. Leave the root where it is. Frame your ceiling to accommodate it. The root will not rot as fast as green timber. It might even help hold the shape." He spoke like he was describing something obvious, like everyone knew how to build a room around a tree root. "Who are you?" Ragna asked. "Niels Haugland. I dig wells. I build root cellars. I repair things that other people have broken." He climbed down into the cut with the easy movements of a man who had spent his life in holes. "I stopped for water. Your girls said you were around back digging, so I came to see what you were digging." He walked to the root and examined it. Then he walked to the walls and examined them. Then he walked to the entrance and examined the cottonwood posts. "Your grade is wrong," he said. "Wrong how?" "Your entrance faces into the drainage path. If you get a hard rain, water will run straight into the chamber. You need to cut a lip, a raised sill at the entrance, and a diversion trench above the room to send runoff around instead of through." Ragna felt her chest tighten. She had been so focused on the chamber itself that she had not thought about what happened when rain fell on the slope above. "Show me," she said. Niels Haugland did not help her out of pity. He made that clear from the start. "I do not do charity," he said. "I work for payment. If you cannot pay, I do not work. I have $31. Keep your money. You will need it for things I cannot teach you. What I want is a different." "What do you want?" He looked at the chamber. He looked at the slope. He looked at the sky. "This is interesting," he said. "I have dug wells and cellars for 30 years. I have never seen a woman try to build a sleeping room underground. If you fail, it will be an interesting failure. If you succeed, it will be an interesting success. Either way, hey, I want to see what happens." "That is not payment." "It is to me." He set down his leather bag and pulled out a measuring cord knotted at regular intervals. "Now, your entrance. We need to fix the grade before you go any deeper." For the rest of that day, Niels taught her things she did not know she needed to learn. He taught her to cut the diversion trench above the chamber, a shallow ditch that would catch runoff and send it around the room instead of into it. He taught her to raise the entrance sill 6 inches above the floor level, so even if water reached the doorway, it would pool outside instead of flooding in. He taught her to leave a thick earth arch at the top of the chamber, not carve it box square. "Rounded tops carry pressure better," he said. "The soil wants to fall. A flat ceiling fights the soil. A curved ceiling moves with it." He taught her the rule of air: low intake, high outlet. Warm air rises, bad air rises. If your vent is at the top of the back wall, it will pull the bad air up and out. Good air enters through the door at the bottom. You do not need a draft. The temperature difference creates one. By evening, Rana's arms were shaking with exhaustion, and her head was full of measurements and angles and words she had never heard before. But the chamber was better. The entrance was higher. The diversion trench was begun. "Tomorrow," Niels said, "we fix that route." He stayed for a week. He didn't sleep in the shack. He had his own canvas roll and his own fire, built in a ring of stones near the edge of the property. He ate his own food. He asked for nothing. But each morning he was at the chamber before she was, and each evening he stayed until she could no longer see to work. He taught her how to frame around the root, using it as a natural brace instead of fighting against it. He taught her how to set the cottonwood posts so they bore weight properly, with the grain running vertical and the base resting on flat stones to prevent rot. He taught her how to mix clay with straw to make a daubing compound that would seal the seams between timber and earth. He taught her about drainage, about ventilation, about the ways that underground spaces failed when builders did not respect the water that lived in every hillside. "Water first," he said again and again. "Always water first. Warmth is easy. Dryness is work." By the end of the week, the chamber was framed and the vent shaft was roughed in and the drainage system was complete. The room was still raw, no door, no window, no sleeping platform, but the bones were right. The structure would hold. On the last morning, Niels stood at the entrance and looked at what they had built. "You will finish this," he said. It was not a question. "Yes? And your children will sleep here?" "Yes. And Jonas Bell will say you smothered them." Ragna felt a flash of anger. "Jonas Bell?" "Jonas Bell is not wrong to worry," Niels said. "He has seen dugouts fail. He has seen children die. His fear is earned. He turned to look at her, but his fear is also old. He knows what went wrong in 1873. He does not know what can go right in 1888. You are not building what he has seen fail. You are building something new. I do not know if it will work. No one ever knows. You calculate. You build. You test. You fix what breaks. That is all anyone can do. He picked up his leather bag. He adjusted his coat. He looked at the slope, at the chamber, at the children playing in the dirt pile. I must go, he said. There is a well 2 days north that needs lining before the freeze. But I will come back. When the snow falls, I want to see if this room does what you believe it will do. And if it does not, then I will help you fix it, or bury what is left of you. Either way, I will know the answer. He walked away without saying goodbye. Ragna watched him go until he disappeared over the hill toward the north. Then she turned back to the chamber. There was still so much to do. The door needed hanging. The window needed framing. The sleeping platform needed building. The vent pipe needed finding. The stones needed gathering. This winter was coming. She could feel it in the wind. She could see it in the way the light changed each evening, golden and slanting, shorter every day. She had weeks, maybe less. She picked up her shovel and went back to work. The vent pipe took 3 days to find. Ragna walked to the abandoned cook shed on the first day and discovered it was not abandoned. A family named Lindgren had moved in 2 weeks earlier, refugees from a failed claim farther west. They had nothing, less than nothing, if such a thing was possible, but they had the stovepipe, and they were not willing to part with it. She walked home empty-handed. That night, she lay awake and thought about alternatives. A wooden shaft would rot. A clay shaft would crack. She needed metal. She needed pipe. On the second day, she walked to town. It was 8 miles each way. Usually, and she left before dawn and did not return until after dark. The hardware store had pipe, 4-inch diameter, galvanized steel, $3 per 6-foot section. She needed at least 12 feet. That was $6. She had 31. She did not buy the pipe. She walked home and thought about what else $6 could purchase. Flour for 3 months, salt for a year, medicine if the children got sick. She could not spend $6 on a pipe when $6 might be the difference between eating and starving. On the third day, she walked to a different abandoned claim, truly abandoned this time, the owners gone back east, the buildings already being picked apart by neighbors. The cook shed was half collapsed. The stovepipe was still attached, but the lower section was cracked and rusted through. The upper section, however, which was intact. 4 feet of good pipe. Not enough. She took it anyway. She carried it home on her shoulder, the metal cold against her neck, and she laid it on the ground beside the chamber entrance and looked at it and tried to think. 4 feet. She needed 12. Then she remembered the salvage pile behind her own shack, the scraps her husband had accumulated, the pieces too small or too damaged to use for building. She had not looked at that pile since August. She had not wanted to look at anything her husband had touched. She went to the pile. She dug through rusted nails and splintered boards and broken tools, and at the bottom, wrapped in canvas that had once been part of a wagon cover, she found 2 sections of stovepipe, 8 feet total, dented but whole. Her husband must have bought them for the cook stove chimney and never gotten around to installing them. 8 feet plus 4 feet, 12 feet, enough. She sat down in the dirt beside the pile and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because she was sad, because her husband, who had failed to finish the walls and failed to stack the wood and failed to stay alive long enough to keep his promises, had somehow left her the one thing she needed most. The platform took a week. She did not have enough lumber to build it the way Niels had described, solid planks over a stone-filled trench. But she had cottonwood logs, and she had the hatchet, and she had time. She split the logs lengthwise and laid them flat side up over a frame of smaller poles. The trench beneath was 18 inches deep. It lined with flat stones she had carried from a dry creek bed 2 miles south. The stones were the hardest part. Each one weighed 10 pounds, 20 pounds, some of them 30. She could only carry 2 or 3 at a time. The children helped, but their loads were smaller. Sigrid managing stones the size of her head. Peter managing stones the size of his fists. It took 4 days to gather enough stones to fill the trench. By the end, Ragna's back ached so badly she could not stand straight. Her hands were cut and bruised. Her shoulders had developed a permanent hunch from carrying weight. But the trench was full. The platform was built. And when she heated 3 large stones in the cook stove that evening and placed them in the trench and covered the platform with blankets, she could feel the warmth rising through the wood. It was not hot, or it was not even particularly warm. But it was warmer than the shack, warmer than the night air, warmer than anything she had felt in weeks. She slept on the platform that night, alone, as a test. The chamber was not finished. No door, no window, just a canvas hung over the entrance. But she wanted to know. She needed to know. She woke at midnight when the stones had cooled. The chamber was no longer warm, but it was not cold either. It was steady, 55 degrees, maybe 58, the same temperature it had been when she lay down. The earth was holding. She went back to the shack and heated more stones and returned and placed them in the trench. By morning, the platform was warm again. It worked, not perfectly, not easily, but it worked. October brought frost that did not melt. The grass turned brown. The cow's milk thinned. The wind shifted to the north and stayed there, cold and constant, pressing against the shack walls like it was trying to get in. Ragna worked faster. She hung the door, 2 layers of planks with straw packed between them, hinged on leather straps, sealed with strips of canvas around the frame. She built the inner door, a quilted curtain on a wooden frame that fit into the passage between the chamber and the entrance. 2 barriers between the outside air and the sleeping space. 2 chances to stop the cold. She framed the window, a square opening the size of a dinner plate, covered with paper she had soaked in lard to make it translucent. It let in enough light to see by. It kept out the wind. It was not glass, but it was something. She installed the vent pipe. This was the most complicated piece, and she worked on it for 3 days. Climbing the slope above the chamber, digging a narrow shaft down through the earth, feeding the pipe sections through one by one until they connected to an opening she had cut in the rear wall near the ceiling. The pipe emerged from the top of the slope, at an angle, protected by a tin cap she had made from a flattened bucket. The first time she tested it, smoke from a small fire in the chamber rose and disappeared through the vent. She stood outside and watched the smoke emerge from the cap, thin and pale against the gray October sky. Air was moving. The system was working. Jonas Bell came back on the 1st of November. He did not announce himself. He simply appeared at the edge of the property, walking with his limp, carrying nothing. Ragna saw him from the slope where she was adding stones to the drainage trench, when she climbed down to meet him. He did not speak at first. He walked to the chamber entrance and stood there, looking at the door, the frame, the vent pipe emerging from the hillside above. "You built it," he said. "Yes." "Show me." She opened the outer door. She pulled aside the quilted inner curtain. She led him into the chamber. It was mid-morning, and the room was cool, 53 degrees by the thermometer Niels had left, a small brass instrument that hung on a nail near the entrance. The sleeping platform dominated the space, raised 2 feet off the floor covered with blankets. The stone trench was visible beneath. The walls were smooth clay, sealed with daub at every seam. The vent opening was dark but clear, the pipe above it disappearing into the earth. Jonas Bell stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking it in. His face was unreadable. "The stones," he said. "You heat them above?" "In the cook stove. Then I carry them down." "How many?" 10 or 12 each evening, enough to fill the trench." "How long do they hold?" 6 hours. 8 if I pack them tight and cover the platform with extra blankets." He knelt and touched the floor. He touched the walls. He reached up and touched the ceiling, which curved slightly where the earth arch followed Niels's instructions. "The air," he said. "It is not bad. The vent draws. Warm air rises and pulls fresh air through the door. And water when it rains. The drainage trench carries it around. The floor has never been wet." Jonas Bell stood up. He looked at her with the same pale blue eyes that had told her she was going to kill her children. "This is not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "A hole, a grave, a place where desperate people go to die slowly instead of quickly." He shook his head. "This is something else. This is—" He paused, searching for the word. "This is built. This is thought through. This is not madness." "You said I would smother them." "I said you might. I did not say you would." He walked to the entrance and looked out at the shack, at the windbreak of sod she had built around the passage. "You have done work I did not think you could do. That does not mean it will hold when the cold comes. That does not mean your children will survive. But it means you have a chance. And a chance is more than I gave you when I left." He turned back to face her. "The worst night I ever saw was January of '73. The temperature dropped to 30 below and stayed there for 3 days. The wind was so strong you could not stand against it. I lost my wife that week. I lost my son. They froze in a sod house that I thought was strong enough." His voice was steady, but something in it had cracked. "I do not want to bury more children. If this room can keep your children warm when that kind of cold comes, then I was wrong and I will say so. But if it cannot, then you will say you warned me. Then I will help you bury them, and I will know that you tried." He left without saying anything else. But he did not say she was going to fail, and that, Ragna realized, was as close to approval as Jonas Bell would ever give. November deepened. The days grew shorter. The cold grew worse. Ragna established a routine. Each morning, she stoked the cook stove and placed stones in the firebox to heat. Each evening, she carried the heated stones down to the chamber and packed them into the trench beneath the platform. Each night, she and the children slept underground. The children resisted at first, the way Marta had predicted. Peter cried the first night, convinced that something was going to crawl out of the walls and eat him. Sigrid was silent, but her eyes were wide and her body was stiff. By the end of the first week, they stopped fighting. The chamber was warm, the shack was cold. Even a 5-year-old could understand the mathematics. By the end of the second week, Peter was asking to go down early. He liked the darkness. He liked the way the earth muffled the wind. He liked the feeling of the warm platform beneath his blankets. Sigrid never said she liked it, but she stopped looking at the walls like they were going to collapse. And one night, Ragna woke to find her daughter's hand in hers, not clutching in fear, but resting gently, trustingly, the way it had when Sigrid was very small. The unexpected help came from Marta Quam's eldest daughter. Her name was Kirsty, and she was 13 years old, and she appeared at the shack one afternoon carrying a bundle of old quilts and a jar of rendered fat. "My mother does not know I'm here," she said. Ragna took the quilts. They were worn, but still warm, better than anything she had. Why? Because I heard Peter coughing, because my mother says you are mad, because I do not think you are mad. I think you are doing what you have to do. Ragna looked at the girl. She had Marta's broad face and strong hands, but there was something different in her eyes, something that had not yet been worn down by the prairie. Thank you, Ragna said. The fat is for the window. My mother says lard goes rancid. This is tallow. It will last longer and keep the paper soft. She left before Ragna could say anything else, but she came back 3 days later with a bundle of dried herbs for tea, and 3 days after that with a length of rope that had come loose from someone's wagon. Each time she said her mother did not know. Each time she left before she could be thanked properly. The gifts were small, but they mattered. Each one was a crack in the wall that the community had built around her. Each one was proof that not everyone thought she was mad. Niels returned on the 20th of November, earlier than he had promised. He had been working a well 30 miles north when the first hard freeze came. The ground had become too hard to dig. The family had paid him what they could. Now he was moving south, looking for work that could be done in winter. He found Ragna carrying stones from the creek bed, her shoulders bowed under the weight, her breath making clouds in the cold air. You're still gathering, he said. I want more, in case some crack. He set down his bag and picked up 2 stones without being asked. They walked back to the claim together, the stones heavy between them, the wind cutting at their faces. At the chamber, he inspected everything. The door hinges, the window seal, the vent cap, the drainage trench, the stone-filled platform. Good, he said, again and again. Good, good. Then he found a problem. The vent cap, the tin bucket she had flattened and shaped to protect the pipe opening, was not angled properly. It would shed rain, but it would not shed snow. If a heavy snowfall came, the cap would clog. The vent would stop drawing. The air in the chamber would go bad. We fix this now, Niels said. They spent 2 days rebuilding the cap. Niels showed her how to angle the opening so that wind would clear snow instead of packing it. He showed her how to add a secondary shield, a piece of scrap metal positioned to break the wind before it reached the opening. He showed her how to mark the location of the cap with a tall pole so she could find it even if the snow drifted deep. If the vent clogs, he said, you must clear it immediately. Do not wait. Do not hope. The moment you feel the air change, you go out and clear it. Even in the storm. Especially in the storm. Do you understand? I understand. Your children's lives depend on air. You can survive cold. You cannot survive no air. I understand. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You will be fine, he said. The room is good. The system is good. You're good. He paused. You are better than I expected. When I first came, I thought you were desperate. Now I see you are stubborn. Stubborn is better than desperate. Stubborn survives. December brought snow. Not heavy snow, not yet, but enough to cover the ground and stay. The world turned white. The wind turned sharper. The cold turned deeper. Ragna measured the temperature each morning with the brass thermometer. Outside, it dropped to 15 degrees, then 10, then 5. Inside the chamber, it held steady at 54, 55, 56. The earth did not care what the air was doing. The earth kept its own temperature. With the heated stones, the chamber climbed to 62, 64, 65. Warm enough to sleep without shivering, warm enough to keep children alive. In the shack above, the cook stove burned constantly. The fuel disappeared faster than Ragna had planned. The 3 cords of green cottonwood were down to 2.5. The pile of cobs and twisted hay was shrinking. The dried stalks she had gathered from abandoned fields were nearly gone, but she was burning less than she would have burned if she had been trying to heat the shack all night. The chamber was saving fuel, not as much as she had hoped, but some. On Christmas Eve, she heated extra stones and placed them in the trench early. She laid extra blankets on the platform. She hung a sprig of dried grass on the wall, not decoration exactly, but acknowledgement. The children did not understand Christmas the way children in towns did. They had no gifts, no tree, no special food. But they understood that this night was different, and they understood that their mother was trying. That night, the temperature outside dropped to 11 below zero. The wind howled against the shack. The stove roared and still could not keep the cabin above freezing. In the chamber, the children slept. The platform was warm beneath them. The walls held their steady temperature. The vent breathed quietly, drawing bad air up and away. Ragna lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind above her, feeling the stillness around her. It was working, not perfectly, not easily, but it was working. She closed her eyes and let herself hope. January arrived like a door closing. The cold deepened, the snow piled. The world outside the claim became a study in white and gray, and the occasional sharp blue of a clear sky that promised nothing but more cold. Ragna's fuel supply continued to shrink. 2 cords became 1.5. 1.5 became 1. She began rationing, letting the shack go cold during the day, heating it only when she needed to cook or warm the stones. The children noticed. They spent more time in the chamber now, even during daylight hours, wrapped in blankets on the platform. The room stayed warm enough to be comfortable. The shack was becoming a place to visit, not a place to live. On the 10th of January, Pater developed a cough. It was not a bad cough, not at first. A tickle in his throat, a rasp in his breath. Ragna gave him tea made from Kirsti's dried herbs. She kept him warm. She watched. By the 11th, the cough was worse. By the morning of the 12th, Pater was feverish. Ragna felt the fear she'd been holding at bay for months finally break through. A sick child in winter, on an isolated claim, with no doctor within a day's ride. A sick child in a room underground where the damp might make things worse. A sick child at exactly the moment when she could not afford any complications. She moved Peter to the shack that morning. She stoked the fire high. She wrapped him in every blanket she had and sat beside him, watching his face, counting his breaths. The temperature outside was mild, 28 degrees, almost warm by January standards. The sky was clear. The wind was calm. It felt like a reprieve. It felt like the weather was giving her a chance to focus on her son. She should have known better. The storm came at noon. One moment the sky was clear. The next moment it was gone, erased by a wall of white that rolled in from the northwest faster than anything Ragna had ever seen. The temperature did not drop. It crashed. 28 degrees became 20 degrees in minutes. 20 degrees became 10. 10 became 0. And the wind came with it. Not wind like she had felt before. Not the steady prairie wind that pushed and prodded and never let up. This was something else. This was a living thing, a screaming thing, a thing that hit the shack like a fist and did not stop hitting. Ragna ran to the door and opened it and could not see 3 feet beyond the threshold. The snow was not falling. Wherein the snow was flying, horizontal, blinding, so thick that it was not snow anymore, but something solid, something that filled the air like water fills a glass. She slammed the door and pressed her back against it and felt the wood shaking behind her. Pater was crying. Sigrid was standing in the corner, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the walls that were groaning under the assault. The stove was roaring. It did not matter. The cold was coming through the walls. through the gaps, through every crack and seam that Ragna had never managed to seal. She could see frost forming on the nail heads. She could see her breath even standing 2 feet from the fire. "The chamber," she said. "We have to go to the chamber." "Peter is sick," Sigrid said. "Peter will die here. We all will. Get your coat. Get his blankets. Move." She did not give them time to argue. She wrapped Peter in blankets. He was burning with fever, but shivering at the same time, his small body confused by the battle between sickness and cold. She pulled on her own coat. She grabbed the canvas bag that held the heated stones she had prepared that morning before the world ended. The passage between the shack and the chamber was only 20 feet long. It felt like 20 miles. She opened the door into the storm. The wind hit her like something solid, staggering her backward. Snow drove into her face, into her eyes, into her mouth. She could not breathe. She could not see. She could only feel Peter in her arms and Sigrid's hand gripping her coat. She pushed forward, 1 step, 2. The snow was already knee-deep and climbing. The wind was trying to lift her off her feet. Oh, she kept her head down and her eyes closed and counted steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She hit the outer door of the chamber with her shoulder. She fumbled for the handle. Her hands were already numb. The door opened. She shoved Sigrid through. She carried Peter through. She pulled the door closed behind her and leaned against it, gasping, shaking, feeling ice crystals melting on her face and running down her neck. The passage was cold but sheltered. The outer door was holding. She could hear the storm screaming outside, but it was muffled now, distant. "The inner door," she said. "Open it." Sigrid pulled aside the quilted curtain. Warm air hit them like a blessing. The chamber was 58 degrees. The stones from that morning were still warm beneath the platform. The earth walls were steady, but indifferent to the catastrophe above. Ragna laid Peter on the platform. She wrapped him tighter. She placed the new heated stones in the trench beside the ones already there. Then she collapsed against the wall and let herself breathe. The storm did not stop. Hour after hour, the wind screamed. Hour after hour, the temperature dropped. Ragna had no way to measure what was happening outside, but she could feel it in the way the air in the passage changed, in the way frost began to form on the outer door, in the way the sound above them shifted from screaming to something lower, something steady, something that felt like it would never end. She stayed in the chamber with the children. She could not heat more stones. The shack was unreachable now, buried somewhere in the white chaos above, where she could only wait and watch and hope that the stones she had and the earth around her would be enough. Peter's fever climbed. He tossed and muttered in his sleep, caught in dreams that made him cry out words Ragna could not understand. She held him. She sang to him. She did not let herself think about what would happen if the fever did not break. Sigrid sat beside her, silent, watching. She was 9 years old, and she had already seen her father die. Now she was watching her brother fight something she could not see in a room underground while a storm tried to erase the world above. "Will he be all right?" she asked. "I do not know." "Will we be all right?" "I do not know that either." Sigrid was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad we are here. Nor I am glad we are not in the shack." The shack would not have held. "I know." She paused. "You were right. About the room. About all of it." Ragna felt tears on her face and did not wipe them away. "I was not right. I was desperate. Sometimes desperate looks like right. Is there a difference?" Before Ragna could answer, she noticed something. The air in the chamber had changed. It was thicker now, heavier. There was a smell she had not noticed before, not smoke. but something stale, something used. The vent. She looked at the opening in the rear wall. No air was moving. The pipe above was silent. Snow. The cap had clogged with snow. Niels's voice echoed in her memory. The moment you feel the air change, you go out and clear it. Even in the storm, especially in the storm. She stood up. Her body ached. Her hands were still half numb from the passage through the storm. Mother, Sigrid said, stay here. Keep Peter warm. Do not move. Where are you going? The vent is blocked. I have to clear it. You cannot go outside. The storm. I have to. She looked at her daughter. If I do not clear it, the air will go bad. Do you understand? We cannot breathe bad air. I have to clear it. Sigrid's face was white, but she nodded. Ragna took the rope that hung by the outer door, a precaution Niels had suggested, one end tied to the door frame, the other end tied to her waist. She opened the outer door. The storm had not lessened. If anything, it was worse. The passage was drifted half full of snow. The world beyond was a howling white void. She stepped out. She could not see. She could not hear anything but wind. She could not feel anything but cold. Cold so intense it burned. Cold that reached through her coat and her dress and her skin and wrapped itself around her bones. She kept one hand on the rope. She kept the other hand stretched out in front of her, feeling for the slope. The vent cap was 20 feet uphill from the chamber entrance. 20 feet through snow that was already waist deep and climbing. 20 feet in wind that wanted to lift her off her feet and throw her into the darkness. She counted steps. 1, 2, 3. She fell. The snow swallowed her. She fought her way back up, gasping, spitting ice. 4, 5, 6. The slope was steeper here. She was climbing now, dragging herself uphill through drifts that collapsed around her, through wind that pressed against her like a wall. 7, 8. Her hand hit something. Metal. Chinned the pole that marked the vent location. She followed it down, digging through snow, her fingers screaming with cold. She found the cap. It was buried. Completely buried. A foot of snow packed against the opening. She dug. She had no shovel, no time to find one. She dug with her hands, clawing at the drift, pulling snow away in handfuls that the wind immediately tried to replace. The cap emerged. The opening was clear. She heard a sound, a faint whisper of air escaping from the pipe. The vent was drawing again. For one moment she stayed there on the slope, her hands in the snow, her face turned away from the wind. She could not see the shack. She could not see the chamber entrance. She could only see white, endless white, and feel the cold eating through her. Then she followed the rope back down. She fell through the outer door more than stepped through it. She crawled through the passage. She pushed through the quilted inner curtain and collapsed on the floor of the chamber. Sigrid was beside her immediately, pulling at her coat, trying to get her to the platform. Mother, Mother, are you all right? Ragna could not answer. Her hands would not work. Her voice would not work. She could only lie there, shaking, feeling the warmth of the chamber wrap around her like something alive. Eventually, she managed to crawl to the platform. Eventually, she managed to pull the blankets over herself. Eventually, she stopped shaking. Peter was still fevered beside her. Sigrid was pressed against her other side. The heated stones were cooling beneath them. The vent was breathing above them. They were alive. For now. Quote, the storm continued through the night. Ragna did not sleep. She could not. Every hour she checked the vent, pressing her hand near the opening to feel for air movement. Every hour the air was moving. The cap was holding. Outside the temperature dropped further. 30 below. 35 below. Numbers she could not imagine, numbers that belonged to stories about places where no one should live. Inside, the chamber held. The stones gave up their heat slowly, steadily, the way Niels had promised. The walls gave up nothing. The earth absorbed the storm's fury and returned only stillness. By midnight, the chamber was 53 degrees. By 3 in the morning, it was 51. By dawn, it was 49. Cold enough to see her breath, but not cold enough to freeze, not cold enough to kill. In the shack above, she could not reach it, could not know. The wash basin would be frozen solid. The gaps in the walls would be packed with snow. The stove would be cold and dead. She lay in the chamber and listened to her children breathe and watched the darkness and waited for morning. Morning came without light. The storm was still raging. The chamber was still dark. But Ragna's body knew that dawn had passed, and she forced herself to move. Peter's fever had broken sometime in the night. His forehead was cool now, his breathing easier. He opened his eyes when she touched his face. "Mama," he said. His voice was small and tired. "I'm here." "Is the storm over?" "Not yet, but it will be." She did not know if that was true, but she said it anyway. The storm lasted 3 days, 3 days of wind, 3 days of cold. Down 3 days of darkness, interrupted only by the pale gray light that filtered through the paper window when the snow shifted above them. Ragna cleared the vent twice more, once on the second day, once on the third. Each time she tied the rope around her waist and crawled up the slope and dug with hands that went numb in minutes. Each time she made it back to the chamber and collapsed and did not move for hours. The children ate sparingly, dried meat, hard bread, the last of the flour mixed with snow water, and cooked over a candle flame. There was not much, but there was enough. The stones ran out of heat on the second day. Ragna could not reach the shack to heat more, but the chamber held. 48 degrees, 47, cold, but not killing cold. Cold that made you shiver, not cold that made you stop. On the morning of the fourth day, the wind died. Ragna opened the outer door to a world transformed. Snow lay in drifts taller than her head. The shack was buried to its roofline. The sun was shining, impossibly, brilliantly shining, on a landscape that looked like nothing she had ever seen. She stood in the doorway and breathed air that was still and cold and clean. They had survived. The temperature on the morning of January 15th was 34 degrees below zero. The brass thermometer in the chamber read 46 degrees. Ragna dug a path to the shack. It took her most of the morning. The door was frozen shut and she had to break the ice with a hatchet. Inside, everything was white with frost. The wash basin was a solid block of ice. The stove was dead and cold, but the shack was still standing, and the chamber had held. While she heated stones, she carried them down. By evening, the chamber was back to 60 degrees, and Peter was eating solid food and asking to go outside and play in the snow. She did not let him, not yet. The cold was still brutal, the drift still dangerous, but she let herself believe for the first time that they were going to make it. That night she lay on the platform with her children on either side of her and listened to the silence. The storm was gone. The crisis was past. But she could not stop thinking about what had happened, about the vent filling with snow, about the crawl up the slope in the blinding white, about how close they had come to dying, not from cold, but from bad air, from a problem she had not anticipated, from a failure she had caught only by minutes. She had built the room. She had done everything Niels had taught her, and it had almost not been enough, but it had been enough. That was what mattered, not the margin, not the luck, just the fact that they were alive and the room had held, and the winter was not over but no longer felt infinite. She closed her eyes. She slept without dreaming. The roads opened on the 19th of January. a full week after the storm had begun. Ragna was carrying water from the well she had dug through 3 feet of snow when she saw Jonas Bell coming across the white field. He moved slowly, his limp more pronounced in the cold, his breath making clouds that the wind tore away. He did not speak when he reached her. He walked past her, toward the slope, toward the chamber entrance that was now visible as a dark rectangle in the white hillside. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the door, at the vent cap above, at the path she had worn in the snow between the shack and the underground room. Then he turned to face her. "Show me," he said. She let him down. The chamber was warm, 61 degrees, the stones freshly charged from that morning's fire. The children were inside, Pater playing with a carved wooden horse their father had made, Zigri reading from the single book they owned. They looked up when Jonas Bell entered, and Pater smiled. "It is warm in here," Pater said. "Mother made it warm." Jonas Bell did not answer the boy. He stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, the way he had turned in November. But his face was different now. The skepticism was gone. Something else had taken its place. "The Lindgren family," he said. "The ones who moved into the cook shed 3 miles east. They froze, all 4 of them. The shed collapsed under the snow, and they could not dig out." Ragna felt the words hit her like a blow. The Lindgrens, the family who had refused to give up the stovepipe, the family who had arrived with nothing and stayed because they had nowhere else to go. "The Hoffmans lost 2 children," Jonas continued. "Frostbite took a hand from the oldest Peterson boy. The Myers cattle died, all of them, drifted into a ravine and buried." He paused. "Marta Quam's family survived, but barely. They burned everything they had, furniture, floorboards, the frame of their second bed, and still the children were shivering by the 3rd day." "And you?" Ragna asked. "I'm old. I know how to endure. But I spent 3 days in a sod house that was colder than this room, and I did not sleep, and I did not eat, and I thought about my wife and my son and how they died in weather just like this." He looked at the walls, at the ceiling, at the vent that was breathing quietly above them. "You did not just survive. You were comfortable. Your children slept. Your boy fought off a fever in the middle of the worst storm in 15 years. The room held. The room held." He said it like he was tasting the words, like he was not sure they were real. "I called it a grave. I said you would smother your children. I was wrong." He walked to the sleeping platform and touched it. He knelt and looked at the stone trench beneath. He stood and examined the vent opening, the door frame, the sealed seams between timber and earth. "I have buried families," he said. "I have buried children. I have stood over graves and wondered what could have been done differently. And now I am standing in a room that should not exist, built by a woman who should not have been able to build it, and I am looking at 2 children who should be dead." He turned to face her directly. His pale blue eyes were wet. "I was wrong," he said again, "and I will tell anyone who asks." Marta Quam came 3 days later. She did not come alone. She brought her husband, a silent man named Gunnar, who had not visited the claim since August. She brought her 4 children, including Kirsty, who smiled at Ragna from behind her mother's shoulder. She brought a jar of preserved vegetables and a bundle of dried fish, gifts that said more than words. "Show me," Marta said. It was the same thing Jonas had said. It was becoming a pattern. Ragna showed her. The entrance, the passage, the quilted inner door, the chamber itself, warm and dry and smelling faintly of earth and warm stone. Marta walked the room the way Jonas had walked it. She touched the walls. She touched the platform. She knelt and examined the stone trench. She stood and examined the vent. Her children watched from the passage, their eyes wide. They had heard stories about the widow's grave. They had expected something dark and frightening. What they found was a room, just a room, warm and dry and safe. "The temperature?" Marta said. "What is it now?" 62 degrees. And during the storm? It dropped to 46 at the lowest, after the stones cooled and I could not heat more. 46? Marta shook her head. Our house dropped to 28. We burned the children's bed frame to stay alive. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If the earth is so kind, why do people climb out of it to live?" "You asked me that before." "I did. You did not answer." Ragna thought about the question. She thought about the storm, about the vent filling with snow, about the crawl up the slope in the blinding white. She thought about how close they had come to dying. "People climb out because they do not know," she said. "They do not know what the earth can do. They do not know how to build. They do not know how to vent, how to drain, how to keep the room alive. They climb out because above ground is familiar. Underground is not. And you knew?" "I learned. I had help. A man named Niels Hoagland, a well digger. He taught me what I did not know." "Where is he now?" "I do not know. He left before the storm. He was working a well somewhere north." Marta looked at her husband. Something passed between them, a question, a decision. "We have a slope," she said, "behind our claim, south facing. The same clay as this." "I know the slope." "Could you show us? Could you teach us what you learned?" Ragna felt something shift in her chest. For months she had been the mad widow, the woman digging her own grave. Now she was something else. Now she was someone with knowledge that other people needed. "Yes," she said, "I could show you." The teaching began in February, when the cold was still brutal but the days were growing longer. Ragna walked to the Quam claim with her measuring cord, and her knowledge and her memory of everything Niels had taught her. She stood on their slope and looked at the lay of the land and saw immediately what was wrong. "The grade is too steep here," she said. "Water will run straight into the entrance. You need to cut higher where the angle is gentler." Gunnar Quam frowned. He was a man of few words, but his skepticism was clear in the way he stood, arms crossed, weight back on his heels. "Higher means more digging," he said. "Higher means dry floors. Choose." He looked at his wife. Marta nodded. They moved to the higher location. Ragna marked the cut line with stakes and string. She showed them where to dig the diversion trench first, before they touched the chamber itself. She explained the principle. Water first. See, always water first. Warmth is easy. Dryness is work. "My husband showed me that," Gunnar said, and there was something new in his voice, not skepticism anymore, but recognition. He had seen this before. He knew she was right. Over the following weeks, the Quam chamber took shape. Ragna visited every few days, checking progress, correcting mistakes, answering questions. The children helped dig, even the youngest, carrying buckets of clay to the growing pile. Marta worked alongside her husband, her strong hands moving dirt as efficiently as any man's. By March, the chamber was framed. By April, it was sealed. By May, when the ground had thawed enough to test the drainage, water ran around the room exactly as Ragna had predicted. "We will not use it until next winter," Marta said. "But we will be ready." "You will be ready." Marta looked at her. The practical skeptic who had called her mad was gone. In her place was something else, a neighbor, maybe even a friend. "Kirsty told me she brought you quilts," Marta said. "During the autumn. She said you needed them." "I did need them." "She also told me you never asked for help. She said you were too proud." Ragna shook her head. Not proud. Afraid. I thought if I asked you would say no. I thought if I showed weakness you would think I could not survive. And now? Now I know that survival is not about proving anything. It is about using what you have, including neighbors. Word spread through the county. Jonas Bell told people. Marta told people. Kirsty told the children at the school gathering, and they told their parents. And their parents told their neighbors. By spring, Ragna had received visits from 5 different families, all of them wanting to see the room, all of them wanting to understand how it worked. She showed them all. She answered their questions. She drew diagrams in the dirt and explained the principles and warned them about the dangers. Water first. Air second. Never seal a room without a vent. Never build below a drainage path. Never trust earth that is wet in summer to be dry in winter. Some of them understood. Some of them did not. Some of them looked at the room and saw possibility. Some of them looked at the room and saw madness dressed in new clothes. But the numbers told a story that no one could argue with. They knew Ragna's fuel consumption through the winter had been roughly half of what the Quam family had burned in a house above ground. Her children had slept through nights when the Quam children had huddled, shivering around a dying stove. Her chamber had held 60 degrees when the Quam house had dropped to 28. The mathematics were undeniable. The earth was warmer than the air. A room in the ground needed less heat to stay livable. A family with less fuel could survive longer if they spent their nights underground. It was not magic. It was not even particularly clever. It was just physics, applied to survival, by a woman who had been desperate enough to try something no one else had tried. Niels Haugland returned in late May. He appeared at the claim the way he had appeared the first time. Suddenly, without announcement, carrying his worn leather bag and wearing his patched coat. But he looked different now, thinner, older. His hands shook slightly when he set down the bag. You survived, he said. We survived. The room held? The room held. The vent clogged twice during the storm. I had to clear it. He nodded slowly. I wondered if that would happen. The cap we built, it was better than the first one, but not good enough for a storm that big. I've been thinking about a new design. A hood that deflects wind before it reaches the opening. A wider mouth that cannot pack with snow. Show me. He stayed for 3 weeks. They worked together, not as teacher and student anymore, but as partners. Niels drew designs, and Ragna criticized them. Ragna suggested improvements, and Niels refined them. They built a new vent cap together, testing it with buckets of water poured from above to simulate snow, adjusting the angles until it shed everything that hit it. They expanded the entrance passage, widening it to reduce the squeeze between outer door and inner curtain. They added a stone bench along one wall of the chamber, a place to sit during the day when the platform was too warm for waking hours. They deepened the drainage trench outside and lined it with gravel to speed the flow. The chamber that emerged was not the desperate construction of the previous autumn. It was something more refined, something that showed thought and experience, and the accumulated wisdom of a winter survived. You have gone beyond what I taught you, Niels said one evening. They were sitting outside the shack, watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were playing in the grass, their laughter carrying on the warm spring air. You taught me the principles, Ragna said. I'm just applying them. No, you are extending them. The stone bench, I did not teach you that. The widened passage, I did not teach you that. You are thinking about problems I did not think to mention. Is that wrong? It is the opposite of wrong. It is what I hoped would happen. He was quiet for a moment. When I first came here, I thought you were desperate. A widow with a shovel, digging a hole that would become a grave. I helped you because I was curious. I stayed because I saw something else. What did you see? Competence, stubbornness, the willingness to learn. Those are rare, especially together. Ragna did not know how to respond. She had spent so long being told she could not do this, could not survive. It could not build what she had built. Hearing someone say the opposite felt strange, almost suspicious. I am 64 years old, Niels said. I have no children. I have no family. I've spent my life digging holes and lining wells and building root cellars for people who forgot my name a year later. I do not mind. That is the life I chose. He turned to look at her. But it would mean something if what I know did not die with me. It would mean something if someone carried it forward. I am not a well digger. No. You're something else, something new, and that is better. The summer passed quickly. Ragna planted a small garden, vegetables that could be stored, crops that would feed them through the next winter. The children helped, their small hands learning the rhythms of planting and weeding and harvesting. The cow gave more milk as the grass grew thick. The shack stood empty most nights now, used only for cooking and daytime work. They slept in the chamber even in summer. It was cooler there, steadier. The children preferred it. Ragna preferred it. She did not see Niels again after June. He left to work a well on a claim 50 miles north, promising to return before winter. She did not worry. He had left before. He had always come back. In August, a man arrived with news. His name was Eriksson, and he had hired Niels to line his well. He had come to tell Ragna that there had been an accident. Niels had fallen. The rope had slipped. He had hit the bottom before anyone could catch him. He asked for you, Eriksson said. At the end, he asked us to tell the woman on the Brecka claim that he was sorry he could not finish the new vent hood. Ragna did not cry. She did not know how. She stood in the doorway of her shack and listened to Eriksson describe the fall and the hours afterward and the burial in a cemetery she would never see, and she felt something inside her go still. He was a good man, Eriksson said. He talked about you, about your room. He said you would carry it forward. Yes, Ragna said, I will. After Eriksson left, she walked to the chamber and sat on the stone bench that Niels had helped her build. The walls were cool around her. The air was still. The vent breathed quietly above her. She thought about the first time she had met him, waist deep in a cut that had the grade wrong. She thought about his hands, weathered and sure, he showing her how to angle a drainage trench. She thought about his voice, patient and precise, explaining the rule of air. Low intake, high outlet, bad air rises, good air enters. He had given her everything she needed to survive. And now he was gone, and she was the one who remained, and the knowledge he had passed to her was the only part of him that would continue. She sat in the chamber for a long time, feeling the earth steady around her, feeling the silence that was not empty but full of everything Niels had taught her. When she finally emerged, the sun was setting, and her children were standing at the entrance, watching her with worried eyes. Mother, Sigrid said, are you all right? I will be, Ragna said. And she meant it. The secondary crisis came in September, when the air was turning cool and the nights were growing long. A family named Thorson had arrived on a neighboring claim late in the summer, too late to build properly, too late to prepare. They had a sod house, hastily constructed, with walls that were already cracking and a roof that leaked. They had 2 children under 5. They had almost no fuel. The father, a man named Henrik, came to Ragna on a cold evening and asked if it was true what he had heard, that she had built a room that stayed warm without burning fuel all night. that she had survived the January blizzard in comfort while others froze. "It is true," she said. "Can you help us build one?" She looked at him. He was young, younger than she was, with the hollow eyes of a man who had realized too late that he was not prepared. His wife stood behind him, holding a baby, their other child clinging to her skirt. "You do not have time," Ragna said. "Winter is 2 months away. A room like mine takes 3 months to build properly. Then we will die. Perhaps," she paused, "or perhaps we find another way." The other way was not a room. It was a modification, a compromise between what was possible and what was needed. Ragna walked to the Thorson claim and examined their sod house. It was poorly built, as she had expected. The walls were thin, the chinking was inadequate, the roof was sawed over poles, and the poles were already sagging, but there was a slope behind the house, south-facing, solid clay. "You cannot build a full chamber," she said, "but you can build an extension, a berm against the back wall, earth piled against the exterior. It will not be as warm as a room underground, but it will be warmer than nothing." Henrik looked at the slope. He looked at his house. He looked at his wife. "How do we do it?" "You dig, you pile, you pack. I will show you." She spent the next month teaching the Thorsons what she knew. Not everything, there was no time for everything, but the essentials. How to pile earth against a wall without causing collapse. How to seal the seam between dirt and sod. How to create a drainage path so water ran away instead of into the house. It was not elegant. It was not safe the way her chamber was safe. But by November, the Thorson house had 3 feet of packed earth against its north and west walls, and the interior temperature had climbed 10 degrees above what it had been. 10 degrees was not comfort, but 10 degrees might be survival. Ephraim Cutter heard about the Thorsons. He heard about all of it, about Ragna's teaching, about the quam chamber, about the families who were copying her methods instead of buying his lumber and coal. He heard about it, and he did not like it. He appeared at Ragna's claim on a November morning, riding in a wagon loaded with boards he was delivering to a claim farther south. He did not climb down. He sat on the wagon seat and looked at her with the same small eyes that had looked at her grave in progress a year earlier. "You are costing me money," he said. "I am teaching people to survive. You are teaching them to dig holes, holes they will die in when the construction fails. The Thorson extension is holding. The quam chamber is complete. My room has survived 1 winter already." 1 winter, 1 season. You think that proves anything? He leaned forward on the seat, wide. "I have been in this territory for 12 years. I have seen methods come and go. I have seen people convinced they have found the answer, and then the answer collapses or floods or burns, and they come crawling back to the old ways. Lumber, coal, houses that stand above ground where God intended. God did not intend for children to freeze. God intends for people to work and pay their debts. That is how a community survives, not with holes in hillsides built by widows who refuse to accept help. Your help comes with chains. My help comes with terms. Terms that keep me in business. Terms that keep the supply lines running. What happens when everyone builds your rooms? What happens when no one buys lumber or coal? The suppliers stop coming. The prices rise for everyone else. Your rooms might save your family, but they destroy the community." Ragna looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what he was saying. She thought about whether any of it was true. "The community," she said slowly, "has already lost 4 people this year. The Lindgrens, frozen in a shed that was not enough. Your lumber and coal did not save them because they could not afford it. My methods are not destroying the community. They are filling the gap that your prices create." The Lindgrens were poor. The poor always die. And now the poor have another choice. That is what frightens you, not that my methods are dangerous, that they work, that they cost less than yours, that they make you less necessary. Cutter's face darkened. He sat back on the wagon seat and gathered the reins. You will regret this, he said, when your rooms collapse, when your students die, when the county sees what happens to people who dig graves instead of building houses. You will regret making an enemy of me. He drove away without looking back. Ragna watched him go, feeling the weight of his threat settle into her bones. He was not wrong about everything. If her methods spread too far, if too many people stopped buying fuel and lumber, the supply networks would change. Prices might rise. Some businesses might fail. But that was not her responsibility. Her responsibility was to survive, to teach others to survive, to carry forward what Niels had given her. The rest was arithmetic, and arithmetic did not care about Ephraim Cutter's profits. The second winter was easier. Not easy. Nothing on the prairie was easy, but easier than the first. Ragna knew the rhythms now. She knew how many stones to heat and when to heat them. She knew how the chamber breathed and what it needed. She knew the difference between cold that was manageable and cold that required action. The children knew too. Sigri was 10 now, old enough to help with the stones, old enough to check the vent, old enough to take responsibility. Peter was 6, still too young for heavy work, but he had stopped being afraid of the underground. The chamber was home to him now. The shack was just a place where food was cooked. In January, when a second hard freeze came, not as bad as the blizzard, but bad enough, Ragna spent the long nights thinking about what came next. She thought about the Quam chamber, ready for its first test. She thought about the Thorson extension, holding steady against the cold. Or she thought about the other families who had asked questions, who had looked at her diagrams, who were building their own versions of what she had built. She thought about Niels, who had wanted his knowledge to continue, who had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. She thought about the spring, when the ground would thaw, when new building would become possible. She thought about what she could teach and who she could teach it to, and how far the knowledge might spread. The chamber was warm around her. Her children were asleep. The earth was holding, the way it always held, steady and patient and indifferent to the storms above. She closed her eyes and let herself plan. By the spring of 1889, Ragna had marked out slopes for 3 more families. She walked their land with her measuring cord and her stakes and her memory of everything Niels had taught her. She showed them where water would run after hard rain. She showed them where the grade was too steep and where it was too gentle. She showed them the difference between soil that would hold and soil that would crumble. Some of them listened. Some of them argued. Some of them insisted they knew better, only to find their first cuts washing out in April rains and returning to her with questions they should have asked at the beginning. She did not mind. She had been where they were. She had made her own mistakes. The difference was that she had made them alone, without anyone to correct her. Now there was someone to correct them, and that someone was her. The teaching became a routine. When the ground thawed, families came. When the ground froze, they returned with reports. What had worked, what had failed, what needed adjustment. Ragna kept track of it all in her memory. She learned from their mistakes the same way she had learned from her own. By summer, she had a name in the county. People did not call her the Mad Widow anymore. They called her the Earth Woman, the one who built rooms in hills, the one who knew how to read a slope. It was not respect exactly. It was something more cautious than that. But it was better than mockery, better than pity, better than being forgotten. The blacksmith arrived in June. His name was Elias Moen, and he came from a settlement 40 miles west where he had run a forge for 8 years. His wife had died in childbirth 3 winters earlier, leaving him with a son who was now 7. He had sold his forge. He loaded his tools into a wagon and traveled east looking for a place where the ground was better and the winters were not so lonely. He stopped at Ragnar's claim because the directions to the county seat were confusing and he needed someone to point him right. He stayed because he saw the vent cap protruding from the slope behind the shack. "What is that?" he asked. "A vent for the sleeping chamber." "Sleeping chamber?" "Underground, in the hill." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the vent cap. Then he looked at the shack, at the children playing in the yard, at the cow grazing in the pasture. "Show me," he said. She showed him the entrance, the passage, the chamber itself, cool in the summer heat, steady at 55 degrees while the air outside shimmered past 90. Elias walked the room the way everyone walked it, touching the walls, examining the platform, looking at the vent. But he looked at different things than most people did. He looked at the door hinges. He looked at the metal cap above. He looked at the iron reinforcements she had added to the entrance frame. "These hinges," he said. "Who made them?" "I made them. From salvage. They are not good." "No, they are not." He knelt and examined the lower hinge, which had already developed a sag. "The pin is too thin, the strap is too narrow. In another winter this will fail." "I know. I do not have the tools to make better." He stood and looked at her. His eyes were dark and steady, the eyes of a man who had spent his life working with things that could burn or cut or crush. "I have tools," he said. "I have a forge. I am looking for a place to set up. Would you have use for a blacksmith?" "I cannot pay." "I am not asking for money. I am asking for a place, a neighbor, someone who builds things that make sense." He gestured at the chamber. "This makes sense, better than anything I have seen in years." Ragna thought about it. A blacksmith on the neighboring section would mean hinges that did not sag. It would mean vent caps that were properly formed. It would mean tools made to fit the work instead of salvaged and adapted. "The section to the east is unclaimed," she said. "The soil is good. There's a slope." "South-facing?" "Yes." He smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him smile. "Then I will stay," he said. Elias filed his claim in July and began building in August. He did not build a sleeping chamber immediately. He built a forge first, a solid structure of stone and salvaged brick that anchored his work to the land. But he helped Ragna with her own projects while his forge took shape. He made new hinges for her chamber door. He made a proper cap for her vent with angled baffles that would deflect wind and shed snow better than anything she had built from flattened buckets. He made tools, a narrow spade designed for cutting drainage trenches, a tamping bar weighted for packing earth, a measuring frame that could be staked into slopes to check the angle. "Niels would have liked these," Ragna said one afternoon, watching Elias shape a new hinge pin on his anvil. "Who was Niels?" "A well digger, the one who taught me to build underground. He died last autumn." Elias nodded slowly. He did not offer condolences. He understood that some losses were too large for words. "He taught you well," he said. "He taught me enough. The rest I learned by doing." "That is how it always is." He set down his hammer and looked at her. "My father taught me to work metal. He taught me the principles. But the skill came from burning myself, from ruining pieces, from starting over until the thing I made matched the thing I saw in my mind." "And now you teach your son." "I try. He's young. He does not always listen." Elias smiled. "He will learn. We all do, eventually." The courtship, if it could be called that, happened through work. Elias helped Ragna stake out slopes for new families. Ragna helped Elias repair tools that settlers brought to his forge. They ate meals together when the work ran late. Wish their children played together while they talked about drainage angles and vent positioning and the proper thickness of hinge straps. There was no moment when the relationship changed. There was only a gradual accumulation of shared labor, shared meals, shared silences that were comfortable instead of awkward. By the time anyone noticed that Elias Moen spent more time at the Brecka claim than at his own, it was already too late to call it news. Marta Quam noticed first. "You will marry him," she said one autumn afternoon. It was not a question. Ragna was measuring a slope on the Quam property, checking whether a second chamber could be cut to serve as a root cellar. She did not look up. "Perhaps," she said. "There is no perhaps. He looks at you the way Gunnar looked at me before we married. He is already yours. The question is whether you will claim him." "I am not sure I want to claim anyone." "No one is ever sure. That is not the point." Marta stood beside her, looking at the slope. "The point is whether you are happier with him than without him, whether the children are better, whether the work is easier." Ragna thought about it. She thought about the evenings when Elias stayed late and the mornings when he arrived early. She thought about the way he talked to Sigrid, seriously, like she was a person who mattered. She thought about the way Petter followed him around the forge, watching everything, asking questions that Elias answered with patience. "The work is easier," she admitted, "than marry him before someone else does." They married in December of 1889 in a small ceremony at the county seat. Jonas Bell was there. Marta and Gunnar Quam were there. The Thorsons were there, their children bundled in coats that were warmer than anything they had owned 2 years earlier. Even Kirsty Quam was there, now 15, with the same broad face as her mother, but something sharper in her eyes. Ragna wore a dress she had made from fabric Elias had bought as a wedding gift. Elias wore the cleanest shirt he owned, which was not very clean. Their children stood beside them, confused and pleased, unsure what was changing, but certain that something was. Afterward, they returned to the claims, both claims, which were now one operation spread across 2 sections. Elias's forge anchored the work. Ragna's chamber anchored the home. Between them lay fields that would be planted in spring, and slopes that would be dug in summer, and a future that felt, for the first time, like something more than survival. That night, in the chamber, Ragna lay awake and listened to the silence. Elias was beside her, already asleep, his breathing slow and steady. The children were on the platform at the other end of the room, the 4 of them together now, Sigrid and Peter, Elias's son Torsten, and the space where more children might come. The vent was breathing above them. The stones were warm beneath them. She thought about the woman who had arrived on this claim 18 months earlier with $31 and 2 children and no idea how to survive. She thought about the hole she had dug in the hillside, the chamber she had built, the vent she had climbed through a blizzard to clear. She thought about Niels, who had taught her what she needed to know. She thought about Jonas Bell, Sue, who had told her she would smother her children. She thought about Ephraim Cutter, who had called it a grave and promised she would regret making an enemy of him. She was not the same woman. She would never be the same woman again. The confrontation with Cutter came in the 3rd winter. A hard freeze hit the county in late January of 1890, not as bad as the blizzard of '88, but bad enough to test every shelter in the district. Temperatures dropped to 25 below. The wind came from the north and did not stop for a week. When it was over, the county counted its losses. 2 families had abandoned their claims, retreating to town when their fuel ran out. One man had lost 3 fingers to frostbite while trying to recover cattle from a drift. A child had died of pneumonia in a sod house that could not hold heat. And Ephraim Cutter had lost his warehouse. The roof had collapsed under the weight of snow. $3,000 worth of lumber was scattered in the wreckage, frozen into blocks that would take weeks to salvage. His insurance would not cover it. His creditors were already circling. Ragnar heard the news from Marta Quam, who heard it from her husband, who heard it from a freighter passing through. She did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She simply noted the information and continued with her work. But Cutter came to her. He appeared at her claim on a February afternoon, walking because his wagon horse had been sold to pay debts. He looked different than she remembered, smaller, older. The confidence that had filled his frame 2 years earlier had leaked away, leaving something hollow in its place. "I need a room," he said. Ragna was stacking firewood outside the shack. She did not stop. "I have produce," Cutter continued, "from customers who owed me. Vegetables, preserved meat, things I cannot sell because no one has money to buy. I need somewhere cold to store them, somewhere that will not freeze." "You need a root cellar." "I need—" He stopped. He looked at the slope behind her, at the vent cap rising from the earth, at the door that led underground. "I need what you have, something that holds temperature, something that does not cost money to heat." Ragna set down the firewood. She turned to face him. "2 years ago," she said, "you stood on this claim and told me I was burying my children in a grave. You told me the county would remember who watched while a mad woman killed her family. You told me I would come crawling to you for lumber and coal." Cutter said nothing. His small eyes were fixed on the ground. "Now you are here," Ragna continued, "standing on my claim, asking for my help, asking me to build you a room in the earth because your warehouse collapsed and your business is failing and you have nowhere else to turn. Yes. Why should I help you?" He looked up. There was something in his face that she had never seen before, not anger, not pride, something closer to exhaustion. "Because you can," he said. "Because I cannot. Because I was wrong about you and about your rooms and about what people need to survive out here. I was wrong, and I am asking anyway, because I have nothing left but asking." Ragna looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything he had said and done. Or she thought about the families he had pressured into debt. She thought about the Lindgrens frozen in a shed that was not enough, unable to afford the lumber and coal that Cutter sold. She thought about Niels, who had helped her when he could have walked away. "I will show you how to build a storage room," she said. "I will mark the slope and explain the drainage. I will tell you what I know about temperature and venting, but I will not build it for you. You will dig it yourself. You will frame it yourself. You will learn what it costs to put your hands in the earth and make something from nothing." Cutter stared at her. "I do not know how to dig." "Then you will learn. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked." She picked up the firewood again. "Come back tomorrow with a shovel. We will start with the drainage trench." She walked away before he could answer. She did not look back, but she heard his footsteps behind her, slow and uncertain, moving toward the slope. The years that followed were not easy. Nothing on the prairie was easy. But they were better. Ragna and Elias had 2 more children, a daughter born in 1891 and a son born in 1893. The claim grew. The forge grew. The reputation grew. People came from 3 counties away to learn about underground rooms, and Ragna taught them what Niels had taught her, and they taught their neighbors, and the knowledge spread like water, finding its way downhill. By 1895, the county had changed. Not transformed, the old ways still dominated. The sod houses and the frame shacks and the endless burning of fuel, but changed. Scattered across the district were rooms cut into hillsides, berms piled against walls, drainage trenches that kept foundations dry. Not many, maybe 2 dozen, but enough to matter, enough to prove that another way was possible. Sigrid grew up and married a farmer's son from the next section over. They built their own chamber before they built their house. Pater became a carpenter who specialized in underground framing, the lintels and posts and door frames that held earth at bay. Torsten took over his father's forge and made tools that Ragna had designed, tools that she had wished for during those first desperate months. The children that came after knew the underground as home. They did not remember a time when sleeping in the earth was strange or frightening. To them, it was simply the way things were done. Jonas Bell died in the winter of 1892. They found him in his sod house, sitting in his chair by the cold stove, looking like he had simply fallen asleep and forgotten to wake up. He was 70 years old. He had survived 23 Nebraska winters. At his funeral, Ragna stood beside the grave and thought about the first time he had visited her claim, about the way he had walked through her shack and kicked at the gaps and told her she was going to die. She thought about his eyes, pale blue and tired, when he had returned after the blizzard to admit he was wrong. "He was a good man," she said to Elias afterward. "Hard, but good. He told the truth even when it was cruel. That is rare." "He told you the truth about your room," Elias said. "Yes, eventually. Then he learned something at the end. But that is more than most people manage." Marta Quam lived until 1902. Gunnar followed her 3 years later. Ephraim Cutter never became a friend, but he became something else, a grudging ally, a man who had learned the limits of his own expertise and found, in that learning, a kind of humility. His storage room held temperature through every winter. His business never recovered fully, but he survived, and he never again told a widow she was digging a grave. The Thorsons stayed. Their earth berm held through 5 winters before they replaced it with a proper chamber. Their children grew up healthy. Their grandchildren would live in houses with basements, a technology that traced its local roots back to a widow with a shovel and a man who dug wells. Ragna Breka lived until 1909. She died in spring, when the ground was soft and the grass was returning and the meadowlarks were singing in the fields. She was 54 years old. She had been a widow for 2 years. Elias had gone first, taken by a fever that came fast and did not leave, but she had not been alone. Her children were there. Her grandchildren were there. The community she had helped build was there. They buried her beside Elias on a gentle slope south of the claim, where the morning sun would find her, and the evening shadows would be long and soft. Sigrid, who was 31 now with children of her own, stood at the grave and said the words she had prepared. She talked about her mother's strength. She talked about her father, who had died before she could remember him, and about Niels, who had taught her mother to build, and about Elias, who had completed what the others had begun. But she did not talk about the room. She did not need to. Everyone who stood at that graveside knew about the room. Everyone had seen it, or slept in it, or built their own version of it. The room did not need words. It would speak for itself, in the winters to come, in the hillsides that held warmth while the wind screamed above. The night of January 12th, 1888, had been the coldest in 15 years. The temperature dropped 70 degrees in 8 hours. The wind reached speeds that flattened buildings and buried cattle and killed people who were caught between one shelter and another. Jonas Bell had stood on this claim 4 months before that night and looked at a widow digging a hole in a hillside. He had seen desperation pretending to be ingenuity. He had seen a mother making a mistake that would cost her children their lives. "Dig your children into that hill," he had said, "and you will smother them before February kills the rest of us." But on that night, while the blizzard erased the world and the Lindgrens froze in their shed and the Quams burned their furniture to stay alive, 2 children slept in a room cut into the earth. The vent breathed above them, clearing bad air, pulling fresh air through the sealed door. The stones beneath the platform gave up their heat slowly, steadily, the way Earth always gives up what it holds. The walls did not shake. The roof did not groan. The temperature dropped to 46 degrees and held there, held through 3 days of wind and cold and white howling darkness. The storm passed. The roads opened. When Jonas Bell walked to the claim and asked to see what remained was a room, just a room, warm and dry and smelling faintly of earth and stone. What remained was a daughter sleeping with one hand thrown free of her blanket because the room was warm enough to forget fear. What remained was a son whose fever had broken in the dark hours, whose breathing was easy, whose life had been saved by 10 feet of clay and a mother who would not stop digging. What remained was shelter, not triumph, not miracle, not the answer to every question the frontier could ask. Just shelter, the simplest thing, the only thing that mattered. The earth holds what we give it. Ragna Bricka gave it everything she had, and the earth, in return, gave her children back alive.